Class, this is Elvin Jimenez and this is my capstone summary. The purpose of my paper is to provide an empirical analysis of the effects of foreign direct investments and may have on economic growth in Latin American countries. FDI is an important source of capital. It complements domestic private investment, enhances technology transfer and managerial skills, and it may boost overall economic growth of the host countries. Due to this, Latin American countries have tailored their political and economic climate to be favorable towards FDI because of the potential economic benefits. My testable hypothesis is, does FDI positively affect economic growth in Latin American countries? In order to conduct my empirical analysis, I captured all my data from the World Bank World Development Indicators website, and my study employs yearly data from 1993 to 2017, a total of 25 years. Of a sample of 8 countries in Latin America. These countries are Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Panama. This time period was chosen due to the existence of large gaps in the data prior to 1993, and I also wanted to choose a time frame where all countries in the dataset experienced a relatively stable economic environment. This gave me a sample size of 200 observations and a strongly balanced panel. The data used in my paper seemed to provide some indicators regarding my hypothesis in that you'd see FDI slightly increase with GDP. The correlation value for FDI and GDP is very high at 0.8, indicating that there is a positive correlation of these two variables. Now, when I modified the GDP variable to GDP growth and the FDI variable to the log of FDI, they no longer had a high correlation. This obviously was to avoid multicollinearity issues in my analysis. Currently, theoretical and empirical literature has done a plethora of studies on emerging markets in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and standalone countries. Most have been tailored to capture certain heterogeneity that only affects that region or country, such as wars, famine, civil wars, political climate, and recessions. Also, most studies include the components that make up GDP so as to try to mitigate heterogeneity in the analysis. These variables are public savings, government consumption, human capital, and population growth. Since my paper is on Latin America, one of the themes in my paper is the effects of trade openness and how controlling for exports or imports can provide us with a better analysis on FDI's effects on GDP growth. My paper takes into account imports as a measure of trade openness, since imports is indicative to how government policy is to receiving foreign products. Another explanatory variable that, according to my research, has never been used is measure of income inequality. By using the Gini index, I was able to hold still income inequality. Since all the countries in my sample are developing nations, I feel it was imperative to take into account income inequality. My econometric technique employed is the fixed effect and random effect models, and later using the Hausman test to see which model best fits my analysis. In summary, the independent and explanatory variables I am using are the log of FDI, the employment ratio of people over the age of 15, the Gini index, the log of government consumption, gross domestic savings as a percentage of GDP, imports of goods and services as a percentage of GDP, and population growth. As for the dependent variable, I ran the same regressions 3 times, changing the dependent variable. First, it was the log of GDP, then GDP growth by capturing the log of GDP and then taking the first difference multiplied by 100, and finally GDP per capita growth rate. So far, my preliminary results are that FDI does have a positive effect on GDP. Unfortunately, not all my coefficients came back with the expected positive or negative sign. However, I did receive promising results from my first model, where FDI came back with a very statistical significant coefficient at the 1% level. I have not completed my capstone project, but I will continue to work on my paper and my model. Hopefully I'll have it completed in due time. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing the other videos.